Brian, come here. I have a question for you.
No.
No? Get over here. I want to ask a question.
What's that?
I want to know how many gallons. It says it on it. Okay, no, I have a question. Why didn't you get a bigger tank? Shut up and answer me. Why didn't you get a bigger tank than this?
It's funny you should ask. And scene.
Hi, I'm Brian.
When I called you, I guess it's probably been 2 months ago now or something. Mm-hmm. So I think now mistakenly thought that, I basically did my estimate of what I use a month. Mm-hmm. And I don't have any meters or anything going right now. So I'll admit I don't know exactly what I use, but I did make a spreadsheet I love to make spreadsheets about, showers and X, Y, and Z, all the things. And I even tried to, go more into the future because our house usage will be a little different than it is in the trailer. So I tried to set it up for our future house usage. And, it could be anywhere, let's say 10,000 gallons, give or take. Pam and I are pretty conservative with our usage. We've been living this way for quite a while. So we use a lot less than the average. If you looked up the average, it's a lot higher than that, of course, of people in houses. But when I got that number of, let's call it 10,000 just for a nice round number, I thought, well, that means I need 10,000 gallons of storage because in my mind, the logic was after the monsoon's over, I may not get more rain. And that's not really true. Again, this is all, we're talking specific to Arizona now, but what you pointed out.
And southern Arizona even.
Yeah,
specific,
that's true, as opposed to northern Arizona. What you pointed out today, which again, even after you told me that I didn't need that much storage, I still had a hard time with it, and I still was had that logic in my mind of, but I have to last from here to here. And what you pointed out today, which is almost always true, even in the lighter years, let's say, you're still going to split that rain that we get, which in this particular area is around 12 inches, give or take. I think it's 11 to 13 is the average. Obviously, you can have lower years, but even when you do, it's pretty expected for that rain to be split kind of half and half between the monsoon and then the rest, right? So I think the real fault, the real flaw that I had was thinking that I wouldn't get any more. And the other point that you made that I hadn't really thought about, even though I knew it in the back of my mind, but it still scared me, is, you're using that water, obviously. It's not just sitting there. I don't have to have it all the time. I'm going to be using it. It's going to be refilling. And if I had gone that big with storage, 10 or 12,000 gallons right off the bat, whether it be in one or multiple tanks, they would have been half empty, if not more, most of the year.
When people think of Arizona rains, I'm going to do rainwater harvesting, all they think about are the monsoons. Yeah. They don't think about the winter rains we get. And if you
We're so programmed to think that way.
If you look at the 30-year average, half of our rain comes during the monsoon season. Well, where's the other half come? Yeah. It comes during our winter rains.
It doesn't feel the same, but it's still,
because you might get a quarter inch.
Right.
But then the next week you get a half inch. And then the next week, 2 weeks later, you get a half inch. Yeah. And you might get a big storm. And big storms can come through from the Baja or from the Pacific, where we can get 2 or 3 inches in a week.
Sure.
Over a course of 4 or 5 days, we can get a lot of rain in a short period of time, just like you do in the monsoon season. But people don't think about the winter rains because it's spread out over about a 6-month period from November through about March. April, maybe. May and June are definitely the worst months of the year. They're the hottest, driest. They're less of a chance to get rain. But, a number of years ago, I remember this so clearly, the first week of June, I live about an hour southeast west of here. I got a 1-inch rain event the first week of June, 2 years in a row.
Oh, wow.
So that's very unusual.
That's rare.
But that rain lasted me until a month later when the monsoons kicked in, and then I had all the water I needed as my tanks filled up. But I'm getting on this kick lately about matching the size of your roof with the size of tank you should get. You should look at that. You need to think about this. I like seeing tanks that fill up in 2 to 3 inches would be an ideal size, and we can talk about some variations of that, but that's a good rule of thumb from my perspective, what I've learned. If you get a tank that fills up in an inch of rain, you just don't have much capacity to get you into dry times and to last you very long before you run out of that rain. And as we know here in Arizona, sometimes it doesn't rain for 4 or 5 months. You know, we can get dry spells in 2 or 3 months easily.
I think that's the part. The 4 or 5 months was the part that drove me to think I need all that water, all the water I need, all at one time.
Yeah. But 2 or 3 months, no rain for 2 or 3 months, that's very common. So when it does rain, you want to collect all you can get. If that big storm does come through and you get 3 inches over a week-long time, you want to be able to hold 3 inches of rain. I've had customers, what really got me, we were talking earlier about this, years ago I had a customer in Tucson, little old lady, and I went to her house, and one of my competitors was trying to sell her a 5,000 gallon tank. And we looked at the calculations with her roof size, and I said, you know, with this roof, your patio roof and your house roof, it's going to take 10 inches of rain to fill up a 5,000 gallon tank with this square footage. So that's way oversized. So yeah, you could fill it up in a year, but you couldn't use the water.
Right.
So
it would only fill if you didn't use it at all.
So why do it if you can't use it? The whole purpose is to be able to use this water. So you can oversize the tank for the square footage of roof area you're looking at. And it really got me thinking about that. So I'm thinking, you know, an ideal would be a 2 to 3 inch, but yet there are situations where I would think a bigger storage would be appropriate. Like I've had customers that, one guy just not too far from here, they're gone all summer. They travel. They're gone 6 months of the year.
If you're obviously going to stretch
the whole monsoon season, they're not here. So yeah, so then you could get a 6 or 7 inch storage capacity system that would fill up based on your roof area, and you just have to look at how much roof area you have based on how big a system you want to get. But just keep in mind, rainwater harvesting is kind of like a bank account.
Yeah.
You got money going in, you got money coming out. You got water going in, you got water coming out. So if you're using, like living off the grid where you're using this water all year long, you maybe don't need as big a system because you're going to be pulling the water out at the same time. But yet, on the other hand, you don't want to run out of water, so you want to have enough capacity to get you into those drier times before you would run out.
So the logic we've used for this, so right now we've got 2 tanks. I have a feeling we'll probably step up to 3, but our logic is these are 2 2,600 gallon tanks. So we're just over 5,000 gallons right now. So what I've got is I've got a shed, which comparatively to the carport in the house is small. It's in the neighborhood of 500 square feet, and it's up the hill a little bit. It'll be running down. It may be a wet system running down to these tanks, but it will be added to this system. The carport is close to 1,000. I think it's 950, something like that. And the house is going to be about the same size as that carport. So ultimately, we're going to have about 2,500 square feet of roof. And so
you're looking at, 1 inch of rain on 1,000 square feet is 600 gallons. So 2,000 square feet would be 1,200 gallons. 500 square feet is half of the formula at 300 gallons.
Yeah.
So you're looking at 600, 600 plus 300. So 1,500 gallons for every inch of rain.
For every inch of rain.
With the house, the carport, and the shed.
So if during some storm event, even over a few days, got 3 inches, I could hold all that water.
If you were empty.
You're right, that's true.
But if your tanks were half full, that's because of the waters you got 2 months ago, and you haven't used it all.
Right.
So yeah, keep that in mind too.
Yeah. So I do think that given what we get in the monsoon and not knowing exactly yet what we're going to use, I do think we'll probably be able to hold more than these 2. So I've left room for 3, and I think we'll end up with a 3rd tank. Now, the reason I started with 2 is because there's really no reason, since we haven't even built the house yet, so we don't even have that 3rd roof. But what I'll do is, as we're building the house, and after we build the house, I'll just watch this storage. And that's another benefit, by the way. I was on the fence when I called you originally about 1 tank versus multiple tanks. And they both have kind of pluses and minuses to them. But, there's several advantages that we are taking advantage of with the multi-tank system. And one of those, which I just touched on, is it's a lot easier to kind of change things as you go, right? So if I decide I want that third tank, it's pretty easy to just add it, especially since I've
and
left
so what we
space for
did
it.
there, you showed it probably on one of your earlier videos, we put a ball valve
Yeah.
on the end of that
Yeah.
tank. So you can start using the system, collect the water, be using it, and then when we put the third tank in, we just got to link it to that ball valve, open the valve, and now you've got 3 tanks.
Yep.
If you didn't have that ball valve, you'd have to drain all the water out of these tanks to do that linking
Yep.
system.
Another advantage is being able to compartmentalize things. So if anything, either through something not of your own fault, if there's some sort of malfunction of some kind, or through your own fault,
Right,
which you
right,
talked about.
right,
I'm sure
right,
you
right.
probably have tons of stories of people leaving something on, doing something
Yeah,
that
they go to
that
water
causes
the
that
tree,
water.
then they forget they
And-
let the water
yes,
run, and they come
so-
out 6 hours later, and their tanks are empty.
So if you compartmentalize things here with multiple tanks, you can kind of limit any problems,
screw-ups,
whether they be
yeah.
your own or not.
Yeah.
And then another I think is cost. I mean, it depends on how big you're going and things. I mean, maybe you could get in that same neighborhood of cost with one big tank, but I think it's tough. When you go to those big tanks, you're going metal almost.
The
you
big
kinda
metal
have to,
tanks,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's hard to keep those down to this cost, I
Yeah.
think. So cost is another.
I'm doing these Pioneer tanks now, and they have a 30,000 gallon tank that sells for a little under $12,000.
Whew. So that's pretty good per
Yeah,
gallon.
it's a really good.
That's pretty good per gallon.
They're a real good cost per gallon. Yeah.
So if
but-
you really need that much, I was looking. I think it's. I don't know what all of Pioneer's sizes are, but when I was looking at, I know Aquamate had a 12. I think
smallest
Pioneer has
tank-
a 9 or a 10 or something.
the smallest
like that,
tank
right?
they make is a 5,000,
Okay.
and they're about $5,000.
Okay.
Plus the shipping. That's just the installation of the tank. And Aquamate, I'm not sure what their cost is now. Their costs were kind of going up when I left them, and I went back to Pioneer, which I used to sell years ago, and they're a really good tank.
I was looking at. I think they have a one that's right around 10. And when
Yeah,
I
they do
called
have-
you just from your website, I think I was considering that tank heavily
Mm-hmm.
because again, I thought I needed way more storage.
But you never would have filled that tank up with
Right,
the roofs.
right.
You do the calculations at 1,500 gallons for every inch of rain. You would have needed 7 or 8 inches of rain.
Yeah.
Without using the water.
You're right.
It never in our desert. We never you'd never get that.
And my mindset was, I'd rather have too much room than not enough. But at the same time, I mean, yes, that's true. I do want to err on the side of
And if
having
you
a
got
little
money
more.
to burn,
but
go for it.
But yeah, there is a limit to that
Yeah.
where I'm just throwing money away at that
Yeah,
point.
right.
So after our conversation, I did realize that, and I do like the fact that this is the way we've gone kind of modular here. I can make that decision on the fly. I like that. So that was a good thing for us. I think that might be, and you probably know the numbers off the top of your head, but I think these guys, if you break them down to per gallon, it's in the 70s, 77
right, 70,
cents-ish,
yeah,
something
72,
like that.
70.
And-
my cost, and by the way, I just let you know, so I've been with the Enduraplast tanks now for about 3.5, 4 years, and I never had a price increase until last November.
I noticed that.
And the price went up 7%. And then I just got word this last week that they're having another price increase on February 8th, next Monday. And that all has to do with the supply. There was a big hurricane that came through the Gulf Coast last year and decimated one of the big manufacturers of resin. So, and then I was reading an article that I think China bought up a bunch of our resin too. So now there's just not much supply here in the U.S. for polyethylene resin. So that is what has driven the price increase of these tanks.
This might be a silly question, but could that price increase be temporary? I doubt
It could
Would-
be.
Yeah,
It
I'd be
could
surprised
be.
if they ever brought it back down. But
They might. I mean, hopefully this next one, it's a 5% increase starting next
Okay,
Monday.
okay.
So on a tank like this, it's another $100.
yeah.
Is what the new price will be.
I was also surprised. I've looked online a lot, just on your website. The amount of options are staggering. The sizes and the,
Yeah.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
But what I was limited by, obviously I wanted a certain amount, and also the geometry of the tanks themselves. As you start to get bigger, they start to get taller sometimes. So
There's only
that's-
so much width you can put down a highway.
Yeah.
when they're shipped.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
sure.
So that's your deciding. So they make two 5,000 gallon versions. One is a 50-50. It's 10 feet wide, 10 feet tall.
Yeah.
You have to have a special permit to go down the interstate with that
Okay.
10 foot wide load.
Okay.
They also make a 5200 that is only, it's about 8 feet wide, maybe 100 inches. So you can go, there's no permit needed, but it's 14 feet tall.
But it's very tall.
So you
Yeah.
have to have a really tall building
Yeah.
if you're using it for rainwater
That's
harvesting.
something that I think that there are some people out there don't think about. You know, it's you might think I need X amount of storage and this tank meets that and that's okay. But when you start getting into 10-foot plus tall tanks, you have to realize that depending on your layout of your land and things, but generally you want your tank to be lower than your roof.
Well,
So
lower than-
unless
and
you're
that's-
doing something special, you generally want your tank to be lower than your roof.
That's what I like about these
So,
2,600 gallon
yeah.
tanks, because they are 92 inches tall. So they have a 2,500 gallon tank, but it's over 9 feet tall.
I noticed
it's
that.
skinnier and
I noticed
taller.
that.
So the 2,600 is my main tank I stock for rainwater harvesting, my big tank, because you can always link them together to get bigger ones.
Yep.
But and then the other advantage is, if you'll notice, and we talked about this earlier, they have these bump outs on the tank that we use for installing our overflows. Well, the top of that bump out is about 4 or 5 inches lower than the main primary basket strainer.
Yeah.
So I've had some instances where the gutter was a little bit under 8 feet tall, and we couldn't even slide the tank under there for the primary basket strainer, but I could put a 12-inch basket strainer on the top of one of those bump outs.
Okay.
And I've had to do that a number of times, and that extra 4 or 5 inches is all I need, and we slide that right under the gutter, and then we don't even, you might use a 2 or 3 inch downspout, but it's just a straight
Yeah,
downspout into that 5-inch hole in the center of that 16-inch lid. You can get by with that if you're really close. You can also dig out and bury them a little bit. If you bury these tanks, these are not meant to be buried, but I've had one guy bury a tank from another manufacturer, and I told him, and he only buried it about 5 inches.
Yeah.
But he didn't do what I told him to do, which is that backfill is either sand or pea gravel. You don't want to just put rocks up against the side of the tank. And he didn't listen to my advice. And a year later, he called me, and he had a crack in the side of his tank.
Yeah.
And I know he didn't tell me all. I could tell he wasn't telling me the whole story. But right where this crack was, there were all these little scratches like this around it. And I said, "What's that? Looks like, what are these scuff marks here?" He said, "Well, that's why my shovel was. There was a rock that was pushing right against the side of that tank." And when the tank expanded, because it had water in it, it was pushing it out against the side of that rock, and it created a crack, cracked the tank. And that rock obviously couldn't go back because it had dirt behind it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't a very big rock, but it was enough to create a pressure point against the side of that tank and cracked it. So if you do backfill these tanks, I've always told customers you can probably get by with a foot, foot and a half, but don't bury them all the way. They're like other people I've seen do. They're not designed to be buriable tanks. When those tanks are full with water, you're fine. But when they get low with water and there's nothing pushing back out, and you've got dirt pushing against the side, and especially if that dirt gets wet and gets heavier and more elastic, and it pushes against the side of the tank, it'll collapse in the side of your tank. Those buriable tanks are designed to be buried. They look like they're very corrugated with big corrugations.
Yeah.
They're very thick. And then when you backfill a below grade tank, you've got to backfill them with sand or pea gravel. You don't just throw the dirt back in with rocks and everything, because a rock up against the buried tank can crack the tank over time. And then I've stayed away from buriable tanks because if a tank does get cracked, you'll never know it's cracked.
Right.
You'll just go, I'm wondering why I'm going through my water so
Right,
fast.
right.
You know, and because you got a leak and to dig those out and to fix that is costly. So I've stayed away from buriable tanks.
So the way I got around some of that, and I got lucky. Now, actually, my house roof and a standard roof would be higher. My roof on this low end, I think, is only about 7 feet or so, and that's actually to the beam, I suppose. So the roof itself is a little higher than that, but it's not as high as like an 8-foot roof would be. But the way I got lucky.
You're sitting down in a hole.
I got lucky. So mine, in a sense, they're recessed, let's say, but I recessed the whole area. I didn't bury down into the ground, but it just made sense for me to recess the area because on both sides I've raised the area to give myself a flat spot to build.
I saw a guy that did a video on YouTube about this, and he buried the tank in a hole.
Yeah.
And then the first big rain event, guess what happened? That hole fills with water, and the tank popped out of the hole. And you can even do that.
Floated.
It floated out of the hole.
Okay.
And there are even scenarios where they'll backfill dirt around the tank, but if the water doesn't go in the tank faster than the water around the outside of the tank fills around, it'll pull that tank out of the dirt and pop it like a cork. It'll pop out of the hole, and you'll break all your fittings and stuff that are down there below the grade and stuff. So you got to be careful about burying tanks that it could float out of a hole.
I've got a pretty good size area here that I've recessed, and I did think about this area kind of filling with water if a big rain event happened.
But you won't, because it's all downhill.
Yeah, and that's also one of the reasons, you know, I try to, you know, that's one of the reasons I'm doing the mulch, and for my house and things, I'll be doing swales and stuff to kind of control the water a little bit around here. But yeah, that's something to think about. That thing will float. So
if it's empty or fairly empty,
you
know, if the water, you know, if the water is higher on the outside than it is on the inside, it'll float.
Okay. Well, so that's something to keep in mind. You don't have to have all your year's storage all at once, and you know,
because you're using it as you're collecting it.
Yeah. So be economical about that. I was way overboard on what I needed. So we'll find out what that magic number is soon. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
I don't know what I want to say.
You're supposed to know your line.
So that's some of the thought process that went into our decision to pick a couple of small plastic tanks rather than one big metal tank. Hopefully you got some information out of that you can use, and it helps you make a decision for yourself. Talk to you next time.
All right. Cut.
That was horrible.
I want to speak to the manager. Your face is horrible.